So the question is, I think it would be useful to clarify and elaborate on the word unconditional when you speak of unconditional love, based on the following. I've heard you say that love is unconditional, and that if there's conditions, like I'll do this if you do that, then it's not love, but a bargain or a deal. You say that when you love somebody, it's unconditional. You just give to them, and if nothing ever comes back, that's okay. Whereas I would argue that fundamentally, even if you are a very low entropy being, every relationship is still implicitly and or explicitly based on conditions, i.e. agreements, requirements, and boundaries, and that there's nothing necessarily dysfunctional about that. To give some examples, in an employer-employee relationship, if the employer would continue paying salaries to his employees, even though they never actually do any work for him, that would eventually lead to the downfall of the company, harming both the employer and the employees in the long term. In a teacher-student relationship, if the teacher would just allow his students to skip classes, not do their homework, create chaos during classes, etc., then that would lead to a dysfunctional learning and teaching environment for everybody involved. Or in a romantic relationship, it would be dysfunctional and destructive to buy a house, live together, raise children, build a future, etc., with a partner who is clearly dysfunctional and untrustworthy to the point where there's a high probability of them harming you or your children. You do want your partner to meet certain requirements and to make sure that they're qualified to be a good teammate on these projects that you are undertaking together, and that both of you are compatible in terms of what you want to do and how you want to do it, which means that you must be selective. It wouldn't be a low entropy decision to just pick any random person off the street and raise a family with them. So based on this reasoning, I would argue that the idea of unconditional love and unconditional giving without requiring anything in return, can actually be high entropy and dysfunctional, and it can actually be motivated by fear. Vice versa, having conditions and requiring the other party to meet you halfway, i.e. having conditions, is not necessarily dysfunctional or fear-driven, and might actually be motivated by love. And I think this is important to point out because there are many people who struggle with establishing healthy, love-driven requirements and boundaries, just as there are many people who struggle with letting go of unhealthy, fear-driven requirements and boundaries. Can you comment on this?
I can indeed. Okay. This is one of those cases where kind of a there's so many ways to take it. The things that I say, the words that I say, are easily miss the intent that I have when I say them. This is difficult for people, particularly this is personal. And when things are personal, and again, if they fit like a shoe that's too small, and they're personal, then you will see ways that they're not good, that you shouldn't follow them. So here's what I say about this. You say, whereas I would argue that fundamentally, even if you are very low entropy being, every relationship is still implicitly or every relationship is not. I would disagree with the every relationship is based on conditions, requirements, and boundaries. Now, obviously, an employer-employee is a business relationship, and business relationships are going to be full of conditions. That's the whole idea of business. It's like a business contract. It's full of conditions. I'll do this if you do that, and that's a business relationship. So I'd say all business relationships are fundamentally based on conditions. That's just fundamental to business relationships. Personal relationships are different. Okay? All personal relationships do not have to be based on those things. Now, the employer, and we'll get into that more as examples, but to deal with the next, the employer-employee is the business relationship. You have a business relationship with the teacher, and you're a student. You say, teacher, I'll give you this much money, and you teach me these things. Basically, whether you pay the teacher or pay a university or whatever, it's the same thing. You're hiring people to teach you and educate you. It's a business relationship. Surely it's based on conditions. If the teacher doesn't teach you anything, then you want your money back. It didn't work. So the teacher has to be a good teacher because that will attract more students, more clients will come to them. So there's competition. There's good teachers and good students and bad teachers and bad students. And there has to be conditions set out so that the bad teachers and bad students don't ruin it for the good teachers and the good students. Yes, definitely need conditions there. So in those kinds of relationships, of course, conditions are necessary. All right. Now you talked about the romantic relationship. Raise children, build a future partner who's dysfunctional and untrustworthy to the point there's a high probability of harming them or your children. Well, of course, if you continue with that, I would say that would be stupid. That's like the same argument that says, oh, well, if you're fearless, then jump off the cliff. Well, no, I don't. I don't jump off the cliff, not because I have fear, but because that's a stupid thing to do. You wouldn't do that. So if you were in a relationship that was so dysfunctional that it was damaging your children, damaging yourself, perhaps damaging the other person, it was just a damaging relationship, then it ought to be terminated. Going further with that is just not smart. So in relationships, one is constantly looking for the low entropy way and making adjustments accordingly. You get to a point where you figure there is no low entropy way. Every direction from here is high entropy for everyone. And usually if it's high entropy for anyone, it may be high entropy for everyone. It just depends on the situation. So you're always making adjustments. If it's dysfunctional, then you have these choices to make. How dysfunctional is it? How functional is it? Because most relationships have their dysfunctional parts and their functional parts. So you have to look at that and say, all right, these dysfunctional parts tend to raise entropy, but these functional parts tend to lower entropy. What's the overall outcome in the long term? Lower entropy or higher entropy in the long term? If it's higher entropy in the long term, you need to change that relationship, not necessarily throw it away, but change it. And if you can't change it, you probably need to terminate it. If you know it's just going to keep getting worse and the entropy is just going to keep going higher, then it's not a good relationship to be in. Yeah, so you say, no, thank you. We have to stop this, and we're not compatible for whatever reasons, and stop it. Now you mentioned, you do want your partner to meet certain requirements and make sure that they are qualified to be a good teammate. You'll never make sure. There's no way to make sure. It's impossible to make sure. You can't even get but a very, I don't know, a very ragged guess, but making sure is impossible. So you accept that you don't have the crystal ball, you don't know what the future is, and there's no way to make sure that this person isn't going to change and become a monster or change and become a saint. You don't know. People change. If you're going to be together for 25, 30, 40 years, people change a lot as they grow up. Okay, so you have no idea how that's going to work, other than if you care for each other now and have a really good relationship, you look at the potential and you say, well, does this relationship have the potential to work out those kinds of issues so that we can grow together? Can we manage this thing? And if it's like, well, no, I don't think it has that kind of potential, just don't think that'll work, then it's a good relationship to dissolve. It's not one for going off on a long term, but you'll never know for sure whether that other person's going to be a good mate or not a good mate. You have to take that leap with lots of uncertainty, just looking at the potential of the person. Is this a person who my way or the highway? Or is this a person that you can actually talk to and they can even sometimes see your point? That's somebody who thinks about things and is willing to give and take. Well, then that's potential. If they're willing to give and take and learn and grow, and they don't see themselves as all knowing, all perfect, and never change. If they're like that, then there's no potential. Very little potential in the relationship. So you just evaluate the person the way they are today, now. And if it's like, yeah, well, I think they would probably try hard, to make things work. That's the kind of person they are. Well, they may have some rough edges, but I'm sure I have rough edges too. And I would try to make it work, because it working is a win for everybody. So I'll have to work on my ego. I'll have to work on my self-centeredness. And they feel the same way. Then that's a relationship that has a lot of potential. No guarantees. Somebody who says, yeah, I have to work on my ego, but they don't work on their ego. That's just an intellectual thought, but they don't really do it. Well, that's a possibility, but you can't know that ahead of time. So starting out in a relationship, you can't know. You just look at the general potential. And if the general potential looks like it might work, then that's about as good as you're going to get. It might work. If it looks like it will never work, well, it's probably one to avoid. But it was like, this has possibilities. It's about as good as it gets, just that it has possibilities. So then you go and you form that relationship, and you try to evolve yourself, try to understand your mate, try to see what their issues are and their feelings are, and try to make them happy. And you do that sort of thing, and you just see where it goes. If it turns out later that it's unsalvageable and destructive, then you terminate it. It's not good to go through with destructive things. Now, if everybody's losing, that's not a good thing to just keep perpetuating. And, well, we should stay, even though we dislike being together, it would be best for the children that we stay together. No, it isn't. Children living in a place where their mother and father don't like each other, it's not good. It raises children who have a real hard time with relationships. They're real confused about relationship. That's not an advantage to the children. You do better to share them every other week or every other month, or some other kind of an arrangement where you share the kids, and rather than try to carry on. Now, if you can hide your negativity toward each other and be positive around the children, then that maybe might be all right, but then it's not that bad. If it's something you can live with, then it's really not all that bad, and you probably could fix it. If you could get rid of some of your ego, you could probably even fix it. But if it is that bad, then you ought to separate. So that's the idea. You can't make sure. You can't set conditions, because the future is impossible to tell. How a person is going to grow or not grow, how you're going to grow or not grow. You just have to say, well, this is possible. This could work out. And then you just go for it and see if you can make it work out. Generally, if both people feel like they're going to try hard to make it work out, then it will work out. That's all you need, is two people that are willing to grow. They don't have to be perfect. They can have all kinds of issues. But if they want to make it work and they're willing to grow, which means change themselves to make it work, then it almost always will. That's the ingredients you need. It only fails when somebody's ego and self-centeredness is so great that they don't want to change. That other person is always wrong and can't do anything right, and they are wonderful and do everything right, and it just isn't fair. So when you get that kind of a thing, then it generally is not going to work out. Now, let's talk about that. Let's say you have that situation where one person has a very low entropy and the other person never develops that. They stay self-centered, maybe even get more self-centered. Okay. Now, if that person who is low entropy really is low entropy and they're not just kidding themselves about being low entropy, then one, the negativity of their partner would not really be a big deal. It wouldn't bother them when their partner criticized them and said, "Oh, you're doing this all wrong." They would just in one ear and out the other. It wouldn't bother them because they don't have the ego. They'd say, "Okay," and they'd ignore it or placate it or whatever, something that would kind of put a little salve on the situation rather than, "What do you mean? Don't be stupid." No, that's not salve. That's fire. That's gasoline on the fire. So instead of putting gasoline on the fire, they just kind of use a fire extinguisher and try to make the fire go out, and it would be okay. And they could live like that because they didn't have an ego and they weren't self-centered. And another person who was abusive and rude and so on just wouldn't bother them that much. It'd be okay. And not only that, they'd have compassion for them. "Oh, my mate is really having a hard time. They're so self-centered that they just struggle all the time and they're unhappy. They have headaches, they have backaches, they're stressed. They're struggling, and it's because of their self-centeredness. It's because of their egos and their fear. And you try to be helpful, but you realize that with that kind of person, it's very hard to be helpful. You can't offer suggestions because if you offer a suggestion, they'll take that badly, like you're criticizing them and get angry. So you just let it go. And perhaps that person in that environment will start to grow, will learn. But if they don't, and it doesn't really upset you because you are a high quality person, then you can live with it. It's not so bad. Okay, so the person isn't all evil. They just have a temper, maybe, or they have insecurity or uh, self-centeredness. Everything, a lot of stuff is mostly about them. So if you don't have an ego, that really you don't mind that. It's really not a problem because it's only when you also have an ego and the egos clash that it becomes a problem. So in that case, you can just live with that person pretty happily and enjoy their good moments because they're not evil all the time. They just do things like that every so often. They may be rude to you 10 or 12 times a day, but the rudeness isn't terrible. They don't hit you with things. They just try to tell you what to do, maybe. They just say, "Yeah, what you need to do is this. What you need to do is that." And you're thinking, well, what I need to do is go take a nap. That's what I'm going to do. So you go take a nap. And they sputter and fuss and whatever, but they get over it. They learn to live with that, and it's okay. And, so it's like 50% of the time, they're delightful. And the other 50% of the time, they're okay. It's not a problem. And you have empathy for them because they're not as happy as they should be. And they may blame you for all that unhappiness. Only reason I'm unhappy is because of you. And you just kind of realize that that's what they say, that's the way they feel, but you don't take it personally because you've got a low ego. You don't have much ego. You don't have much self-centeredness, and that's okay. They can say whatever, and you don't argue with them. You just say, "Yeah, well, okay," or "Oh, do better next time." Whatever it is that placates them and makes them feel better, and then you go on and get the good part when they're not like that. So then it's a matter of how grown up are you, and how much of that can you live with and still be happy, still have a good relationship. So it's not that both people have to meet each other in the middle. If you just have one person who is very low entropy, they can put up with a whole lot of fussing and negativity and not really care. It doesn't affect them personally. and they just get along. And if they can get along and everything works, so you have one person who fumes and fusses and another one who doesn't, but they both do things together. They both, enjoy each other's company sometimes. There's good parts to the relationship as well. Sweet parts, even sometimes really good parts to the relationship. Well, that more than makes up just for the negativity that is not hard to deal with. So you can do that. It doesn't have to be even. It doesn't have to be they give as much as I give. It's not like that at all. You can give more, they can give less, and that's okay. Or the other way around. You can give less and they can give more, and that's okay. It gives you an opportunity to grow. So it doesn't have to be that way as long as the overall relationship is lower entropy in the long term than it is high.
Right.
You see? So you look at it and you say, okay, we do this for the next 20 years. Is that okay? Instead of, I bet I could get something better. Well, that's a wild shot. Maybe this is as good as it gets. Maybe the probability of getting something better is only 1 in 100. That almost everybody you meet is going to have that much ego that they would fuss and fume and be self-centered. It's just typical. It's the way people are. People are just that way. So you can say, well, okay, this is just the way it is, but the probability of getting something really much better isn't all that high. And this isn't bad. The good parts are good enough to take care of the bad parts. So in the end, the entropy is not just getting higher and higher, it's either staying the same or getting lower and lower. So then it's a good relationship. Even if one person is low entropy, the other person is not so low entropy. Now, if
Right.
that second person is not just not so low entropy, but they're just really miserable, they're just really brutal, there aren't any good parts. It's just all bad parts. Well, then it's time to get rid of that relationship. It's not a good relationship anymore. So it just depends on the individuals. If we say that there was a low and a high entropy, well, how high entropy is the high entropy and how low entropy is that low entropy individual in that relationship? And that
Yeah.
will kind of determine whether or not in the long term the entropy does not continue to grow. It either stays the same or it gets better. So people are a mixed bag. It's really very difficult to find someone that doesn't have any fear and doesn't have any ego and doesn't run their life by their beliefs and needs and wants. And that is a rare commodity. So the idea that, oh, I'll find somebody like that. No, you probably won't find somebody like that. You'll probably find somebody who's self-centered, who has ego, who has beliefs, and you'll just have to learn to live with those in a very positive way because that's the way humans are today. Now, you might say, well, I'm looking for that 1 in 1,000. Well, you'll probably spend a long time looking for that 1 in 1,000, and that may be pretty frustrating in itself. So rather than set your sights on the perfect relationship, set yourself sights on a relationship that's functional, at least functional enough that in the end, your entropy is a little lower. The good parts make up for the bad parts because that's realistic. That's the way it's likely to be. And from your partner's viewpoint, that's true for them too. When they're looking at you, they're going to have to say, well, not perfect, but not so bad either. Some good parts there. And when you give that person that kind of a loving environment, you optimize their potential for growing up. So you give them that environment, whereas you fight back with them and it's ego against ego and self-centeredness against self-centeredness. Nobody grows up much. Everybody just stays about the same. But if one person is low entropy and the other not so much, that not so much person is now in an environment where they're more likely to grow up. It might take 5 or 10 or 15 years, but it's probably just going to get better with time, not worse. Probably. So you have to look at the potential in the relationship. Could this work? And I think if the answer is yes, then it's, well, let's give it a try and see. And then it's, how good is it? And how bad is it? And is it worth continuing? So in summary, I guess there's always uncertainty. If you wait for that perfect person that meets all your requirements forever, that probably isn't actually going to happen. You have to leap into these things not knowing. It's like becoming a parent. It's like that too. You've never been a parent before, and you think, oh, becoming a parent, that's really going to change things. You'll have kids, and they'll tie you down, and you can't do this, you can't do that, and you won't be able to do other things that you do, and then you'll have all this responsibility, and you'll raise the kids, and hopefully they'll be good kids, and you'll be a good parent, but you're not so sure that any of that's true. And you just have to leap into it and say, well, that's the way we humans are. We pair up, we have kids, and that's part of being human. And all right, let's get on that roller coaster. It's going to crank us up to the top of the hill and let us go. And that's life. It's going to be some tight turns and some scary places, and it's just life. And you figure you deal with it as you get to it. If you're looking for surety and looking for really high probabilities that everything's going to be the way you want it to be, you probably never launch, because that situation is unlikely to occur. And when it does occur, it's probably not real. It's probably something that you've decided the time's getting short and you need to find that. And then eventually you go make the leap anyway, just because that's the way it is. And you convince yourself that this maybe has higher probability than any of the others. But I don't think they do, because you're looking at too far in the future with people who change a lot. So any analysis that you do in the beginning can't be more than a good guess. It isn't going to be any more than a good guess. I think just you look at the potential and say, well, is this the kind of person that would work out the issues when they come, or the kind of person that won't work out any issues, that don't want to change? Then if it's like, no, they're pretty reasonable, I think we could work things out, then I don't think it gets any better than that. So uncertainty is a key. If you're low entropy, the other person doesn't have to be so low entropy. And if they're low entropy, you don't have to be so low entropy. The relationships can still be good relationships, even if they've got some pieces of them, some parts of them that are not so good. That's okay. You don't need a perfect relationship to have a good relationship. A good relationship can have its downsides, but you have to be grown enough that downside is not really so much a downside. It's not a problem. If you're not grown, then that downside becomes a really big deal. How dare you say that to me? And you get yourself all up in a wad. But if it's you get insulted or told what to do or something else, and you just live with it gracefully. And it's just not a big deal then. So it just depends on the people, but nothing's for sure. It doesn't have to be balanced. It just has to be, in the long run, not constantly growing entropy. That's the killer. You don't want to go that way. But if it's not that way, if the good parts outweigh the bad parts, or even come close to outweighing the bad parts, then it's probably about as good as it gets. It is on your probability of getting anything much better than that is low, just because that's the population. I mean, look around. That's where we live. We live in a culture that is dysfunctional, creates dysfunctional people. We have some of that dysfunction too. And the idea that somehow you and your partner are both going to be just totally happy with each other all the time is unlikely. That's not likely the way it's going to be. So you just have to be able to deal with that in a growing way. Take it as a challenge for growing up. And that's, I think, about as good as it gets. To wait for that perfect person when you're not yourself a perfect person is a dream that's not likely to happen. You know, you're not a perfect person. You might think you are. I don't mean you. I'm talking about you, but people, they're not perfect. They're not a perfect person. And everybody kind of thinks they're more perfect than they are. But figure, here you are, you're part of this culture, you're part of the society. You've got your own dysfunction, and so does, any potential partner you have. They're part of this culture and society too, and they're going to have their own dysfunction. What's important is that you are willing to deal with it, positively deal with it, accept it, let it be, not take it personally, be okay with it, indulge their needs. Maybe they'll indulge your needs. Try to get by like that, and that can make for a good relationship where it's more positive than anything else. And the negative things are not a big deal. So that's kind of the idea. So yes, if you have unconditional love, then you don't mind some negativity from your partner. You just love them. Now, just because you love somebody doesn't mean that you always be with them, or it doesn't even mean that you like them. You can love people you don't like. A lot of families are like that. They love their families, but they don't particularly like them. So love is a thing where, yeah, you just give because you do, because that's the way it is. And if the other person has problems, well, you put up with them gracefully if you can, because there's good parts there too that they have. If they don't have any good parts, well, get rid of the relationship. If it's a family member, well, you can't get rid of them, but spend as little time as you can with them. If it's a partner, then you can dissolve the relationship. There's no sense staying in something that's going to continue to get worse and worse and worse. Now, if you could maybe just grow yourself up enough, it wouldn't keep getting worse and worse and worse. You could maybe keep it from ever going that way. It would always be okay. So it depends on how much you can grow. If you can grow up enough, then, well, a lot of relationships would turn out to be pretty good. It takes two to fight. It takes two to argue. It takes two to really generate unhappiness. So if only one is arguing and fussing and complaining, then there are no arguments really. There's not a lot of negative transfer. It's just okay for the most part. So it just depends on what's your tolerance level, which depends on how grown up are you. And same with your partner. What's their tolerance level? How grown up are they? Is it worth it or not? And the grass always looks greener on the other side of the fence. That just seems to be innate, not just in humans, but in critters as well. They always want what's different. I have 4 dogs, and it's funny that they will leave their own bowl of dog food to run over to another dog's bowl and see what's in that. They know that other dog's got something better than they have. So that the grass is greener on the other side of the fence is just human nature and dog nature and cat nature, and I think it's just consciousness tends to think that way. Other people have it better than I do. Other people got something better. I want to see what they have, see if that's better than mine. That's just self-centered, ego junk. But then if you figure we have a whole population, a whole culture of people full of self-centered ego junk, then that's the kind of people that are there. Those are the kind of people you're going to meet. Those are the kind of people that you end up getting married to, because you're one of them as well. And you just have to see if you can have the potential to work stuff out enough that it's more pleasant than it is harmful. So
Yes.
that's the practical view of it, right? And that's not the Hollywood princess view, and you and she and the prince, go off into the sunset to live happily ever after. It generally, most relationships aren't like that. Most relationships are a struggle. But it's much better to be in a relationship struggling than it is to not be in a relationship struggling.
Hmm.
The rewards of sharing are large. And part of that is just that's the kind of animal we are. That's what our drives and our instincts and everything, that's what they lead us to do. We find mates, we have children, we raise the children, and it's part of being a human being. So we have drives that way. And it turns out that most of those things then will turn out to be very positive for us. They may be a lot of work. You may have to deal with some unpleasantness, but all in all, it's good. It's very good. Having children are kind of scary because of the limitations and because of the expense that they have, and your life changes when you have kids, but it's worth it. It's more than worth it. It turns out in the long run to be just a very positive thing. And having children helps you grow up. It's a big incentive to grow up. You can't be self-centered when you got a couple of little self-centered kids that you need to take care of. It
Right.
it just is helpful, and the rewards of it are more than what you can calculate intellectually, because it satisfies your instincts and your human needs and things, and that happens on a level that's outside the intellect. It just feels right and feels good, and you are trying to raise children that will be healthy and happy and have good attitudes, and that's a challenge. But the way to do that is to make yourself grown up, because as much as you are negative and full of ego and self-centeredness, you're going to mess up your kids. And as much as you are, low entropy, you're going to help your kids. So they're a big incentive. You don't want to hurt your kids. They're a big incentive for you to grow up. So that's, life is like that. It's full of uncertainty. There's no way to use your intellect and say, this is the one and this is the best choice. You can say, well, this has potential. So let's see how it works out. Because there's probably 10,000 females that would have potential with you, and you can see how it works out. But none of them are particularly that much different than each other, because we're all part of the same culture. We all have similar kinds of issues and problems
Right.
and ideas. I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We will continue to post videos for free on my YouTube channel, but please understand, these videos are expensive to produce. They represent many thousands of hours of production and editing, as well as all the necessary audiovisual equipment, computers, and software. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.